This video explains how you might go about planning your answer to a 25-mark evaluate question. I've spoken to quite a few people who seem to say that they are happy writing an analysis paragraph and an evaluation paragraph. The thing they find harder is working out which points to pick. And so this video tries to talk through a bit of a thinking process for how you might come up with different points for your essay. When we're answering a question that says evaluate the impact of, I think 3 steps are really helpful. The first one, if applicable, work out which market structure is being asked about. That will be really helpful when it comes to drawing diagrams, using the keywords as well. Knowing which market structure will be a really helpful first step. Secondly, and perhaps the most important one, pick 3 analysis points, and in each point you're aiming for a high-level diagram. And then thirdly, for each of those points, you need to evaluate. We're going to focus in this video on number 2, picking these analysis points. I think the one that people often find the most tricky to do. When we're thinking of these points, the first place to go is always the impact on consumers and the impact on producers. These are our 2 biggest economic agents in terms of microeconomics. And so thinking through the impact on consumers, through a change in price or choice or the level of welfare loss, and the impact on producers, particularly the level of supernormal profit, I think should be your first port of call. Once you've thought through the impact of your factor on those 2 groups, I'd suggest a few other places to think. This is not an exhaustive list, but I think 3 helpful places to go. The impact on efficiency, the impact on externalities, and if it creates an incentive for anti-competitive practice. So firstly, efficiency. Does it change the level of productive or allocative or dynamic efficiency? If so, that could be an analysis point, that change. Does it, in terms of externalities, increase or reduce the level of external cost or external benefit? And in terms of anti-competitive practice, does your chosen factor create some incentive for firms to perhaps collude or to use limit pricing to try and prevent any more entrants to the market? Each of these different impacts or incentives has relative diagrams we could use. So starting with the impact on consumers, a diagram like this, with an increase in demand could show you a higher price or a greater level of choice because Q1 is greater than Q. Or I think particularly helpful, this diagram here, which shows a welfare loss if we have a monopoly instead of a perfectly competitive market. This diagram is really useful if you're analysing some change in the level of competition. Either the market becomes more competitive or less competitive. Going back to this diagram will be really helpful. As you become more competitive, you move from the monopoly towards perfect competition. As you become less competitive, moving back from a more perfectly competitive market to a monopoly, you can show there's that welfare loss, which impacts consumers through the higher price, going from PPC to PM, and the lower quantity from QPC to QM. In terms of impact on producers, a diagram like this, a really high-level one to draw, modelling an increase in variable costs, hence the MC curve rising and the AC curve as well. You could also do an increase just in fixed costs by just shifting up the AC curve. In terms of efficiency, you could use a diagram like this, showing a profit maximising firm producing at quantity Q, showing that it's not being productively efficient or allocatively efficient. If there's been some change in the market, you could show the firm getting either closer or further away from either of those 2 types of efficiency. We can also show dynamic efficiency on a diagram like this. Dynamic efficiency is the incentive for firms to invest in research and development over time to maintain efficiency. We can assume that in the long run that will cause the firm's costs to go down. So we can model dynamic efficiency as this lowering of variable costs, and hence MC and AC both shift downwards, leading to lower prices and lower costs. Externalities, we can show external costs like this, or an external benefit diagram as well, both useful diagrams to be able to use. And in terms of the incentive for anti-competitive practice, we can show limit pricing. That's where firms charge the lowest price possible to limit competition by charging a price where AR equals AC. Or we could draw a game like this, which shows that firms have an incentive to collude. The Nash equilibrium of this model is low price, but we know that both firms are better off charging a high price, which shows there's an incentive for the two firms, firm A and firm B, to collude, to work together to charge the higher price and make the greater level of supernormal profit. Okay, having gone through those different diagrams, different thought processes, I'm going to show you two examples of how we might do this in practice. This is my first question. So the market for ferries between Portsmouth and the Isle of Wight is currently a monopoly. Evaluate the likely microeconomic impact of a new entrant to the market. So I'll get my checklist up. These are the 5 areas I suggested you think about. Going through them, starting with the impact on consumers. Well, we're moving from a monopoly to a duopoly, 2 firms, which means competition is increasing, which means we can show the reduced welfare loss, going back to that welfare loss diagram. That's a good thing for consumers because likely that prices will fall and choice will go up, hence a reduced welfare loss. In terms of producers, well, the incumbent firm is likely to see a reduced level of supernormal profit because their demand will decrease. I can show that on a diagram as well. Perhaps some impact on efficiency and externalities, but I think quite clearly a big impact on the incentive for anti-competitive practice. We've moved to a duopoly. There's now 2 firms, which means there's a strong potential for collusion. I could draw a game to demonstrate that the 2 firms may well collude in order to try and charge the higher price. Those would be my 3 analysis points. Moving on to a second example, evaluate the likely microeconomic impacts of the use of the price capping formula RPI minus X in the railway industry. Again, quite clearly an impact on consumers. We'll see lower prices. We can show that on a monopoly diagram, perhaps charging a price below the profit maximising price. There will be some impact on producers, but perhaps a bit harder to identify. But moving down to efficiency, while if firms are encouraged to invest, there's likely to be an increase in dynamic efficiency as they get more efficient over time. I can show that going back to the diagram showing a shift down in the MC and AC curves as my second analysis point. And moving on, unlikely to be any anti-competitive practice, but there could be externalities. We may well see an increased quality of service if we see firms investing more, and therefore we see a reduced external cost of delays to commuters who commute by train, for example. Again, these would be my 3 analysis points, each of them incorporating a high-level diagram. I suggest this checklist will be really helpful, particularly the first 2, the impact on consumers and producers, but then the other 3 areas as well. Helpful ones to think through when trying to work out your 3 points, particularly working out 3 high-level diagrams to include as well. I'll leave this example here. If you'd like to have a go trying for yourself, here's an example question for you to try. Evaluate the likely microeconomic impacts of a merger between mobile phone providers 3 and Vodafone. I won't give you the answers, but using that checklist, I think there are 3 strong points with 3 high-level diagrams that you could use as your 3 analysis paragraphs.